Hello and welcome everyone to this new webinar, the first actually of a series of thematic webinars that will be hosted under the umbrella of the Global Transport Knowledge Partnership, the GTKP. This webinar will be looking into making transport, how to make transport resilient to pandemics with a specific focus on low and middle income countries. This webinar is being organized by the International Road Federation in collaboration with the Transport Research Laboratory TRL in the UK, and thanks to the support of the High Volume Transport program funded by the UK Aid. Let me introduce myself. My name is Susanna Zamataro. I'm the Director General at the International Road Federation, and I'll have the great pleasure of being your moderator today. In this 60-minute or now 55 minutes journey this afternoon, I will be accompanied by my two fellow speakers today. Let me introduce them to you. I have the great pleasure of welcoming Kevin McPherson. He's a principal consultant at TRL. Kevin has extensive experience in design and implementation of planning systems, particularly for the highways sector. He has been a technical specialist of many network planning projects in Asia and Africa, with responsibility for design, embedment, and training of processes and systems. He has also conducted institutional assessments and design of transport data systems, and recently completed work on a recap project to refine the methodology for the Rural Access Index, which is one of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, SDG 911. Welcome, Kevin. I have also the pleasure to welcome Vishnu Mohan Kumar Jaya, Senior Consultant at the Urban Catalysts in India. Vishnu works across research and practice domains on sustainable urban mobility. He holds an integrated master's degree in development studies from the Indian Institute of Technology in Madras, and has more than 8 years of work experience. Through his prior stint at the Indian Institute of Human Settlements and the Institute of Transportation and Development Policy, ITDP, he has worked extensively on fields such as urban governments, urban environmental services, demography, sustainable mobility planning, shared mobility, and public finance with cities, state, and national governments. Welcome to both of you. I'll now quickly run you through the agenda for this webinar this afternoon. First of all, I have the pleasure to introduce you to the Global Transport Knowledge Partnership and give you a quick run and demo of the GTKP knowledge portal we just launched at the beginning of this month. Kevin will then provide us a presentation on really how to make transport in low and middle income countries resilient to pandemics, and the planning guide that TRL has just released. Vishnu will talk about active mobility for a more resilient transport system, key levers. We will take also at the end 10-15 minutes of time to take some questions and answers, and then we will close. So 55 minutes to do all this, help me out. And before I get started, I pass and I start with my presentation. A couple of housekeeping rules. First of all, I think all of you should be seeing at the bottom of your Zoom screen the chat and the question and answer. So use the chat if you want to greet everyone or make some comments. But please, if you have a question, make short questions, indicating as well to which of the speakers you're addressing your question, and use the question and answer function for that. We'll make sure we'll find some time at the end to respond to your questions. And if we are not able to cover everything today, we'll make sure we'll get back to you after the webinar. I want to also, right from the beginning, mention that this webinar is being recorded, and we'll make both the recording and the PowerPoint presentations available to all of you. You don't need to write to us. You will be notified as soon as the proceedings of this webinar are ready. Without further ado, I guess I'll just get started with my presentation. And as mentioned, I'd like to give you a quick overview of what the GTKP is, and also hopefully give you quickly a quick live demo into the portal we just released. First of all, the Global Transport Knowledge Partnership is a project that was initiated and funded by the UK government Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, FCDO, formerly called DFID, and this until 2011. The portal is being managed by the International Road Federation. Well, the program actually is managed by the International Road Federation since 2009. Over the span of a decade, GTKP has been funding research on 9 key transport areas that you see displayed on the screen, and has also provided most of it access to knowledge and expertise, specifically and particularly for low and middle income countries, through a web portal that I will show you in a few minutes, gtkp.com. Since 2017, the GTKP portal is also used to host knowledge resources produced by the United Nations Road Safety Collaboration Group. And we'll come to that in a few minutes. We had a chance, thanks to the COVID Response and Recovery Fund that was launched by HVT, to get a grant to revamp, if you want, enhance as well the GTKP portal. And the new portal was actually launched, as I mentioned before, on the 4th of March with a webinar. All the proceedings are as well available on the IRF website for those of you who are interested. The ambition of GTKP is really to fast track access for low and middle income countries to knowledge, experience, learning resources, all those good practices that we have been seeing, coming up throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, and that we're still being seen and implemented. We have looked both at response, but also impacts. And the ambition is also to, going forward, to work together in partnership with others, initiatives, with other organizations, and see GTKP grow into the future as a fully fledged capacity building hub, but also a knowledge umbrella to get access to all those resources. This long winding road is a little bit here portraying the long-term objective, why we're doing all this, the objective of revamping GTKP, and most of it also providing this new knowledge hub on COVID-19 is to make sure that you have tools and resources to support efforts for a transformative transport agenda post-COVID-19. Not all what came with COVID has been negative, in the sense that COVID has opened our eyes on a lot of opportunities and has created momentum for us now to seize those opportunities and change the way we move and we organize transport. The journey's just started. We don't consider, we just said that also during the launch of the GTKP portal, it's not delivering the portal was just the first step of a longer journey that we hope very much we will be undertaking with you going forward. So this is a call to all of you out there to reach out to us, to share your knowledge, make sure that whatever you do and you produce is shared with others via the GTKP. The intention of GTKP is not to substitute any other website or any other organization work, but we consider it just as a gateway. It's a one-stop shop that will allow you, it's a portal that will allow you to access all those precious resources and information and tools that have been produced throughout last year, and they're still being produced. And of course, we look very much forward to undertake this journey together in partnership. This is not an IRF only effort. We really are looking forward to make of GTKP a shared effort and a common platform. These webinars, and this is really the first thematic webinar, it's an opportunity in a way for us to let you know what is out there, let you know about the existence of this portal, but also takes a moment to zoom in into some of these pieces of work and research and tools that have been developed, and to give you an opportunity to learn better, exactly as we're doing today. Kevin will tell us in a few moments about the planning guide they just delivered, thanks as well to the funding of HBT as well, and under this great initiative that the UK Aid is funding. The next webinar, let me tell you already, it's very close. It's on Monday. We'll be hosting another thematic webinar that will give you some hints on a piece of work that IRF has been doing with the Global Alliance of Road Safety NGOs. Specifically, we'll be looking at Africa's response to COVID-19 impacts on transport and mobility. We have undertaken a review in 7 different African countries. So make sure you register and join us. All the information is both on the GTKP website, but also on the IRF website. Now, let me stop here. And with the help of technology, I should be able to now jump into the, let me start doing this. I just want to give you a quick guided tour through the GTKP, and I hope you all see that well on your screen. Of course, for those of you new at GTKP, this is a new look and feel for the website, more modern, but what was more important, we try to ameliorate the functions of the website, the navigation for the users, and the backend system as well, to make sure that going forward, the maintenance of the website can happen easily and at lower cost. Where to start? First of all, when you land on this page, you will immediately see via these latest additions to the library, the latest additions. So what has been added in the GTKP, so that you don't have to look left and right to find it. If you click on it, then you should be able to, you will get into a page that gives you always an overview in few lines of what this document, this knowledge resource is about, and a link to download it. Let me come back to the home page. Extremely most important for you to know as well, we have created this new COVID-19 Knowledge Hub. You can either access it directly from here, or you can access all those resources from the left-hand side, what we call the vertical menu. In the COVID-19 section, we have organized it around 3 main baskets, if you want: COVID-19 impacts, COVID-19 responses, and COVID-19 recovery pathways. Then we've also created some pages for what we call some of the horizontal issues. So COVID-19 transport data, a zoom into the impacts and the responses, and the tools available for transport workers, women, children, elderly, and people with disabilities. When you go into the COVID-19 responses, use always these arrows. You'll be able to enter other knowledge pages. They are in alphabetical order, but just to give you a sense, we have been using a sort of a matrix. So you can enter either by mode of transport: aviation, rail, road, maritime, whether you're looking at public transport or informal transport, whether you're looking at freight or you're looking at passenger transport. And let me quickly give you, probably show you an example of what those knowledge pages look like. We have summarized We have summarized the issue, the core issues. You'll be able to find plenty of links while you look into the text. And what is really important, you will have a selection of documents, of links, of tools at your fingerprints at the bottom of each of those knowledge pages. Those documents, recommended links and etc., you'll be able to always to find them via the as well via the knowledge center. You can search by theme, you can search by type of knowledge. Are you looking for guidelines? Are you looking for general knowledge? Are you looking more specifically to videos or to some sort of media files? The author, which region, and also the country or the language. GTKP can host knowledge in any language. I think I have abused my time, so I'll just invite you to take a tour and make sure, if you want to get reach out to us, use the contact form that is in here. One important mention that I want to do as well: UNRSC resources are specifically are accessible via the menu here, but also directly from here. You will find in here lots of resources that will be very helpful for you for the new decade of action, and it's just kicked off. So keep an eye on this section as well. We will be updating this section as we move along, and as soon as the new action plan for the new decade will be ready. I'll stop sharing my screen here. We can always come back later on. I'd like now, without further ado, pass the floor to our first guest speaker, Kevin McPherson. I see you already, Kevin, getting ready with your presentation. And Kevin will be talking to us about making transport in low and middle income countries resilient to pandemics, a planning guide. Kevin, great, we can see your screen.
Okay, thank you, Susanna. I hope you can hear me okay, and I hope you can see the screen.
Yes.
With the slide presentation. Thank you too for the introduction to the GTKP website. That was very, very useful. Our project here is funded by UK Aid, as Susanna said, and under the High Volume Transport Applied Research Programme of the UK government. The HVT programme, High Volume Transport Programme, is administered by IMC worldwide. My name's Kevin McPherson, and I work with TRL, Transport Research Laboratory in UK. And our project here was obviously in response to the HVT call for action, call for collective action for international transport stakeholders to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. And the sort of backdrop to our project, as Susanna just said, and as is available on the GTKP website, there have been many disruptions to transport as a result of COVID, and also as a result of the government measures that have been taken in response to COVID. So I'm sure everyone here is familiar with a lot of these measures and responses that have been taken. And so the backdrop to our project is really, having looked at these measures and having looked at the responses, we've put together a planning guide to help synthesize these, produce a sort of concise summary of all of these. And they cover the disruptions caused by COVID. They cover public transport, freight transport, border crossings, toll road revenues. There have been impacts on road fatalities, And again, as Susanna said, there have been some positive benefits from COVID in the sense that road fatalities have been reduced. Maybe not as much as we would have liked, but there certainly has been a reduction there. And some forms of active travel, walking, cycling, have actually improved. So there are some potential spin-offs that we really need to look at going forward. There have been significant impacts on not just the transport sector, but also on national economies and on commerce and livelihoods. We've seen recessions in many countries, drops in exports and foreign investments. We've seen global drops in freight volumes and many job losses, especially in public transport, but also in freight and tourism, on which transport relies heavily. And I think there are also some specific issues on which countries have been hardest hit, and also on which sectors of the population have been hardest hit. And so there are definitely gender and inclusion aspects in all of this. So this is really the backdrop to our project. And the sort of concept of our project was really to basically the disruptions we've seen, the impacts we've seen have been so great and so huge that we feel it's necessary to look at ways in which the transport sector can become more resilient to future pandemics. So we looked at producing a guide which would help do that. And the way we did that really was to look at a number of evidences around the world. In fact, the GTKP website would have been a big help to us if it had been available 6 months ago. And in fact, I probably need to get back to Susanna later, maybe put some of the information we found as a result of our literature reviews on there. But we conducted a number of reviews on the impacts and responses to COVID, which again, Susanna's mentioned a lot of these, so I'm not going to go into in a huge amount of detail here. But our guide does include a sort of concise summary of these impacts and measures. We looked particularly for health measures in transport plans, national and city plans. And we tried to figure out if there's anything that we can learn from existing transport plans, transport strategies with regards to health measures and how those are incorporated in transport plans. The third box on the right, in particular, we looked at some transport plans in low-income countries. Recently, over the past 10 years, we looked at them to figure out if there was any help or guidance in transport plans, but also in the terms of reference for transport plans to assist in production of these, and again with regards to public health. We also looked at national pandemic plans that have been, surprisingly to me actually, when we looked back at this, we found lots of national pandemic plans from a long time ago, and I'll come back to those in a second. And we've also looked at hurricane response plans and disaster plans to see if there's anything that we can, any nuggets of things that we can get from there that will help us in making transport more resilient to future pandemics. So one of the interesting things we found when we looked at started doing a literature review, we found back in 2005 the World Health Organization put out a call for national influenza preparedness plans, and influenza is and has been a pandemic in the past. And so it's very interesting looking at the responses, the plans for these, and the call itself, but also the plans. And in fact, many countries around the world, not only high-income countries, but also low-income countries, have been producing our pandemic influenza pandemic plans, over the past 15 years, and a lot of these are available through standard Google searches and by looking at websites of government agencies and including WHO itself. So that was a rich source of information. The other one that we highlight here is the TRB, Transportation Research Board in the United States. It actually produced guidance for transport planning in response to pandemics back in 2014. And when you look at it in detail, it has a lot of the measures we're seeing in response to COVID were actually documented in that document back in 2014. The document itself was very much geared towards public transport, passenger services, and was always also very much oriented to the United States. But there was still a lot of very useful stuff in there that, again, as I said, we've seen in response to COVID. So in some senses, it was a very sort of prescient document, forward-looking document. The third one on here is the high volume transport call for action itself. It did specifically call for greater integration between health planning and transport planning. And right at the end of 2020, the World Health Organization also put out another call for supporting healthy urban transport and mobility in the context of COVID-19. So there's been lots of calls in the past to look at health and transport together as part of a coordinated approach. But when you actually look at the details or the results of a lot of these things so far, I think there's a couple of main issues. I mean, I think the first one is that certainly up until now, most transport plans, most transport strategies have really paid very little attention to public health. There hasn't been a great linkage between public health and transport. And if you look at the health sector plans as well, they really don't pay much attention to transport and don't really give much guidance for the transport sector. And also, I think a lot of the measures we have seen have been, I think, kind of short term and a little bit ad hoc in some cases. And I think this is the main thrust of the planning guides we've put together, is to try to enthuse countries around the world to think about how you will make transport more resilient in your country to future pandemics, not just looking at the very short term and the very short term responses that have been made, but also looking at the longer term actions that we can start to put in place to help for future. So the guide itself, the planning guide, as Susanna said, we completed that and got approval from HVT to publish that back on March 9th. It's on the HVT website, and as far as I understand, it's also now on the global GTKP. And there's really four main parts to the guide. It's only 15 pages long if you take off the front and back covers. So it's quite a readable and deliberately concise guide. The first part, it talks about the impacts and measures that we've talked about before. So in some senses, it's kind of a very high level distillation of a lot of the impacts and responses we've seen. Now, again, a lot of the detail of these will be available on the GTKP platform, but also in lots of other publications that we've seen too, including not just web publications, but also webinars from IRF, from PIARC, from World Bank, from ADB, from African Development Bank, etc. So the first part of the guide describes or sets the scene for what impact COVID has had and other pandemics have had in transport. The second part of the guidance is about the operational planning. We split it into sort of more operational planning and more long-term planning, and how that relates to sustainable transport going forward. And the fourth part of the guide is about how to integrate the two of these in a transport pandemic plan. So let me just talk a little bit about the operational side. Just lost my place on my notes. So on the operational side, it's really focused at all transport organizations, including public transport operators, freight transport operators, toll road operators, government agencies, anyone or any organization involved in transport that has any public-facing component or any public-facing function. And that would include, for example, government agencies with responsibility for driving licenses or permits for whatever reason. And there's a sort of common thread among all of these that really applies to all transport organizations in protecting the health and safety of workers, how best to do that, protecting the health and safety of the public, developing contingency plans for absenteeism, and providing public information about services. Now, all of these things, they have specific and direct impact in terms of, especially COVID-19. There's a lot of measures we've seen across all of these different areas that have been taken in response to COVID-19.
2 minutes, Kevin.
2 minutes, okay. The next part is the planning guide, the role of the national transport ministries in creating this pandemic plan, to work with other government departments, take responsibility, for putting together a transport pandemic plan with other agencies, especially health agencies, and also working with NGOs, national non-government organizations on disaster relief, logistics, public health expertise, and also fostering awareness training of any responses and policies in regards to these. With regards to the longer term aspects, what we have seen is there's a lot of similarities between the long-term responses to COVID and the global roadmap of action, which has been produced by Some for All, and I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with this. If you look at universal access, efficiency, safety, green mobility, there's a lot of policy areas that have been implemented and looked at, not just in high-income countries, but also in low-income countries. Support for active travel, streamlining processes and procedures at borders, implementing e-procurement systems, implementing e-payment systems. A lot of these things have specific direct benefits in terms of improving resilience to transport, to pandemics. And just finally, a lot, when you look at if you look at the GRA, a lot of the things that have been talked about for a long time in relation to universal access, such as urban planning or rural planning or integrated multimodal planning, a lot of these really could help in response to future pandemics. And in terms of urban planning, certainly if you do look to plan your city around resilience to future pandemics, then you'll also need to be talking to the transport agencies and the transport planners to make sure that there's an integrated approach across all of these. So just my final slide, what do we expect to see from this snow? So we basically, given that transport is critical to the functioning of an economy and is specifically impacted by pandemics, and it has a special role in pandemic response, then we'd really like to see explicit operational and strategic planning for future pandemics to make transport more resilient. And what we'd really like to see is a use of the planning guide by ministers of transport, by national and city transport planners and health planners to improve resilience of transport going forward, so that the next time a pandemic comes, the transport sector is more resilient. So the planning guide, as I said, it's only 15 pages. Have a look at it. Any questions? Certainly, use the contact details at the bottom of this page or on the planning guide itself. And with that, I pass back to Susanna. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kevin. And I'm sorry for playing the cop in the room, but we need to give some time as well to Vishnu, who has some relevant experience to share with us. Vishnu, while you get ready, Vishnu will be talking about active mobility for a more resilient transport systems, key levers, and providing us quite some interesting examples. Vishnu, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna, and thank you for having me here as well. Yeah, let me just start off by introducing myself and the organization that I work for. I am Vishnu. I work at an organization called the Urban Catalyst, and we work at the intersection of gender, sustainable mobility, and inclusive urban development. We are based out of New Delhi. So today I'm here to talk about a recent research project that we are undertaking. It is again funded by the High Volume Transport Applied Research Project. And essentially what we have tried to do through our research project was to understand the kind of actions that cities and countries, and many cities and countries have done these actions, the kind of actions that cities and countries have taken during the pandemic, using the pandemic as an opportunity to prioritize active mobility. Let me just take a second to stop my video. I'm sorry, I have a little bit of connection issues, so I'm switching on video. Okay. So essentially, we wanted to identify the kind of actions that cities across the world have taken to use the pandemic as an opportunity to prioritize walking and cycling, and what kind of levers have they used? What kind of levers were present in each of these cities, which enable them to take these kind of actions? And from the findings that we have gotten, we aim to create a guidance document, which would then be shared with governments in cities across India and in other low and middle income countries on how they can use these lessons to build and scale cycling infrastructure. So obviously the first question that will come to your mind is, what are key levers? What kind of levers are we talking about? All right, so you should be seeing the levers in your screen right now. So essentially, these are elements of systems which interact with each other. What we found, these were the initial set of levers that we had imagined. And during the course of our research, we found out that in most of our case study cities, these elements were present in some form or the other. And in some cities, some of them were more prominent, some took the leading role, others might not have been so key after all. And we have highlighted three elements here: institutional framework, capacity, and financing, which we feel have been, we feel are strategic for any city which is going to introduce, promote and prioritize sustainable transport. So then naturally a question should arise, what about the other ones? Are they not key after all? Do you not want to focus on them? So that brings us to the second part of our research, where alongside key levers, we also looked at the aspects of opportunities and threats. And what we found was that in some of these cities, something which was a key lever might soon turn out to be a threat in the future. So, okay, point here to note is that I will not be discussing in detail the kind of findings that we have, the narrative of the cities that we have undertaken, narratives of the case studies that we have undertaken. So if you have any questions, please route that to the Q&A and I will be happy to answer them. So now that you have a fair sense of what key levers are, now let's go to the kind of interventions that have taken place the world over. So when we wanted to identify cities for our case studies, we were presented with a plethora of information, and most of them was actually great literature. There was a lot of social media reportage, a lot of newspaper reportage, lots of blog posts from organizations like IRF or the World Bank, which were talking about cities which had taken up a number of interventions. So then we tried to get a sense of what the scale of these interventions was. We found two interesting databases. Firstly, there was the COVID Mobility Works database, which recorded more than 550 interventions across the world, of which around 350 were on walking and cycling. Then we stumbled upon to the Shifting Streets database, which, as you can see in the table below, has recorded more than 1,100 interventions till August 2020. So till August 2020, the Shifting Streets database has recorded about 1,100 interventions. So what are the kind of interventions, you ask? Well, the pie chart below gives you a fair sense of what has been happening. The pie chart is actually from the European Cyclist Federation, ECF, which has looked at the interventions that have happened in European cities. And what they found was that almost 3 out of every 4 interventions was to, introduce temporary cycle lanes, pop-up cycle lanes, or create more permanent cycle tracks. And one out of every 5 interventions was to calm down traffic or to reduce the speed of motorized vehicles. So you will see that a lot of the focus has been on cycling and on the enabling of cycling. The same graph also shows that, say, for example, widening sidewalks for pedestrians has probably not gotten the same sort of importance. And this is something that we found out in our study as well, that walking did probably got much lesser attention than cycling during the pandemic lockdown. People somehow cycling was something which excited both citizens as well as governments much more. I'm not going to deliberate on the reasons why or on the permanence of these, but I'm sure that is something interesting to look at. The graph on the right side, again based on findings from the Shifting Streets data set, show that at the same time, there has been a lot of importance given to pedestrianization onto allocation of curb space and carriageway for walking and cycling. So what did we have? Around 1,100 interventions. How do we fix upon our case studies then? So what we then did was look at the kind of case studies we wanted. We wanted a variation in the geographical location, in the kind of income groups that these countries and cities represented, and their expertise or their, the maturity in approaching walking and cycling as a system. So finally, we fixed on 4 cities, which was Addis Ababa, located in Ethiopia, Bengaluru, located in India, Bogota in Colombia, and London in the United Kingdom. Both Addis Ababa and and Bengaluru are emerging case studies. The kind of interventions that have the history of active mobility there is limited to just about 10 years, while Bogota and London have had a much more robust system. They are much more mature systems and have had a longer history in dealing with these. So to the verse that we have found in each of these cities. What I will do now is go to the second part of our study, which will provide guidance documents, which will create a guidance document for India in particular and for low and middle income countries in particular. So here we have a set of 6 headings under which we feel that cities should take actions. They have some sub points. I will explain each of these with the findings that we have had from our research. So the first thing that we learned is that in India, especially, and even in other low and middle income countries, there is no understanding of the quantum of latent demand there is for active mobility, for walking and cycling. So, for example, in India, when you prepare a comprehensive mobility plan, as cities have done in the past, sometimes they even completely exclude walking and cycling. So there is absolutely no scope of you cannot plan for something without knowing the quantum of what you want to tackle. Therefore, one of the first set of recommendations that we are putting forward, which is based out of learnings from London as well as from Addis Ababa, is that there should be regular events to collect regular annual events, I would say, to ensure that walking and cycling, the quantum of walking and cycling in cities is collected. You need to have that understanding to plan ahead. And then it is not just important to understand demand, we also need to simultaneously improve the demand that is there, that should be there for walking and cycling. So what did we learn from a city like Bogota and its long 50-year history of promotion of cycling? The major lesson that we learned there was that it was it took them nearly 25 years to make Cyclovia, their flagship event, a permanent fixture of their city's life. It took them another 10 years to ensure that this event was present at all levels of their, or at all neighborhoods in the city. It connected the entire city together and everyone felt connected to that event. You need to have that sort of sustained approach to ensure that that the latent demand for walking and cycling becomes much more apparent. And in we learn from Addis Ababa that the regular participation of political and administrative leadership is also imperative to ensure that the idea that active mobility is necessary, gets imprinted on the public's mind. Finally, we also have evidence from London where a healthy streets approach has been adopted since 2014 to essentially show citizens that active mobility has tremendous benefits for a person's individual health, and thereby by extrapolation to the city's public health systems as well. And this is something that you need to continuously keep on reiterating through your strategies and plans, through your communications and outreach, that there is a very strong link between walking and cycling and your individual health, as opposed to the kind of sedentary lifestyle that motorization leads you down. Secondly, we learned about the importance of strategies and plans. In a low income setting like Addis Ababa and by extension Ethiopia, the city and the state undertook a non-motorized transport strategy as the cornerstone as the bedrock for their efforts. The strategy itself was very clear. It set out a clear set of goals and targets for the city and for the country to achieve. It linked them to the kind of outcomes that it linked them to outcomes on road safety, on public health, on air pollution, and to an improved quality of life. So a strategy is often the bedrock of what you want to plan for. Based on that, you need to create an enabling policy and regulatory framework, and you need to create then the next step, which is a strong institutional structure and framework. From our study, we found out that the cities that we picked out, in 3 of the 4 cities that we picked out, there were dedicated teams and departments which encourage walking and cycling. Now, this is not the case in India, which is why we have advocated that in India to such an approach be encouraged, that we do take up dedicated teams for walking and cycling. But it's not sufficient to ensure that there are dedicated teams. They should have the legal and financial backing to ensure that the kind of plans they propose, the kind of strategies they propose, are passed by the legislature or by the executive. And for that, you need a strong active mobility committee or a non-motorized transport committee. And what kind of, and finally, another guideline that we have proposed is that cities and states should adopt street design guidelines. Now, this might seem rather obvious to most cities, but what we found from our efforts in Bangalore is that the city has not formally adopted any street design guideline. And therefore, there are 3 or 4 competing street design guidelines from various organizations, which might end up creating a jumbled approach to urban development in the city.
1 minute.
All right, thanks, Susanna. I just have, this is my last slide. So finally, we come to financing and then we come to financing and funding. It's usually something that it is something straightforward, but at also the same time, not at all straightforward. You hear all the time from citizens, from government officials that, oh, money is not an issue in India. We have enough money. We can get things done. But what happens is that the mindset is still geared towards projects which advocate for flyovers, which advocate for car-oriented infrastructure. What we need to do is, again, go back to your, you need to go back to your NMT committees and ensure that whenever there is money being spent, it should be on promoting active mobility alongside active mobility, and not at the cost of active mobility. We also have the case of Addis Ababa in terms of capacity building. And we know that cities in India and lower and middle income countries constantly struggle with it. There is no magic faraway tree who will suddenly bring us thousands of traffic engineers or architects or urban designers to suddenly make our streets better. But what Addis Ababa has done is that over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, they have simultaneously started to introduce strong programs on urban designing, on traffic engineering, on improving walking and cycling in their university curricula, and at the same time using civil society, using civil society organizations, their own walking and cycling teams to ensure that capacity is being built across the board. And finally, I will stop with the case of piloting projects as a way to suddenly build demand in cities. What we've seen in Bangalore is that piloting is an initiative which have helped citizens and decision makers to see the benefits of a particular kind of new idea. So pedestrianization was something which was very much reviled perhaps in the city earlier, but once a new initiative was piloted during the pandemic, suddenly everyone, political leaders, business owners, and citizens could suddenly see why pedestrianization and why active mobility was suddenly a great idea. With these words, I conclude my talk. I would gladly take questions. Thank you, Susanna. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Vishnu, for this really insightful presentation. And I think we will need another hour, and probably we might organize another webinar to dig further into all this fantastic work. We are now left with 7 minutes to take a couple of questions. Some of them we have been answering directly. While Vishnu takes his breath back again, Kevin, maybe I'll start with you. One question: can you give us some examples of cases where measures have been taken which have had unintended consequences, and maybe have had to be rolled back or adjusted later? And how would the guide help in that respect? Any country identified those?
Yes, hi, thanks. The guide actually highlights a couple of cases where there have been kind of unintended consequences of some actions that have been taken. I'm thinking specifically of some countries where there was immediate restrictions imposed on freight transport for non-essential goods and services, which had a knock-on effect on the movement of essential goods as well. So the measure was targeted at non-essential goods, but it also had a knock-on impact on the essential goods. And I think part of the guide says talk to the professionals in these areas, talk to the logistics and freight forwarders, and to figure out these policies before they get implemented. So as part of the sort of long-term guidance going forward, be ready for types of situations and talk to the transport operators, talk to the logistics people, put in place policies so that if pandemics happen again in future, then you can make sure that your measures have an intended consequence and don't have any unintended consequences too. So there is some examples in the guides of these types of things.
Thanks, Kevin. And a quick question, if you can answer that very quickly, because then I want to come back to Vishnu. How are pandemics different from disasters, and what does that mean in terms of the guide that has been produced?
Yeah, thanks. We did look at especially hurricane response plans as well. But pandemics are different. We've seen that disasters tend to be more localized and tend to be shorter term. So if you think of a hurricane, for example, you can typically see the hurricane coming. It's going to come next week. It's going to hit a small part of your country, and it's going to have an impact maybe for a week or 2 weeks afterwards. Pandemic has been much greater impact across the whole world, and the responses are necessarily have to be long term, but we also have to think of the long term consequences of some of these responses. And I think some of the impacts of the pandemic will be around for a long time, and we need to take the longer term view.
Thanks, Kevin. Vishnu, I'll turn back to you in the last 3 minutes that we have now. Vishnu, you have talked about demand and supply and key levers and institutional frameworks in pushing for active mobility. How important is the role of civil society then in ensuring that these ambitious goals can be achieved?
Thanks, Susanna. Actually, that's a very important question. And again, it's an example of the kind of opportunities and threats that I was talking about earlier. So what we've seen in the case, especially in the emerging cases of Addis Ababa and Bangalore, was that it is civil society that actually started the reforms that were that sort of push for the reforms in both these cities. They in Addis Ababa, organizations like WRI, ITDP, and NACTO went and started working with the Department of Transport at the federal level and with the organizations at the city level. In Bangalore, in this very interesting case called the Tender Show Project, a private organization went and directly contacted the chief minister of the state in which Bangalore is located and pushed him to start looking at pedestrianization, start looking at building pedestrian infrastructure as a key part of the city's future ahead. And even in a developed city like London, we see that civil society plays a very important role. They play actually a number of roles. They do advocacy work, they provide technical support, they provide consulting services to organizations like TFL, and they also act as custodians of infrastructure. So this is a very interesting example. We've seen, there is something called as a National Cycling Network in the UK, which is of which an organization called Sustrans is the custodian. So what it means is that this network, which extends all across the UK, is in a way managed by this organization. Even though the land belongs to private individuals or to the government, the organization ensures that consistent guidelines are applied to it. They ensure that they connect with walking and cycling groups to ensure that people are aware of this network and use it, and thus help build demand. So as you pointed out, civil society plays a very important role, but it is very hard for us to sort of build that into a guidance document. Thanks, Susanna.
Thanks to you, Vishnu, and I totally agree with that. Vishnu, we don't see you. Maybe you can turn your camera on, so at least now the audience can also see you as well. I know that the connection is not always the best. Well, it's now 3 o'clock in Geneva. We are getting till the end. It went really fast, but we are reaching the end of this webinar. A couple of information for you. First of all, as I mentioned at the beginning of this, the recordings of this webinar together with all the presentations will be made available to you probably in the next couple of days. No need to write, just check the irfnet.ch website, but you will also all be notified as soon as the proceedings are available. And I'd like also to invite you all to join us again on Monday for another thematic webinar under the umbrella of the GTKP. That webinar, as I mentioned right at the beginning, will be looking at impacts and responses to COVID-19, specifically in Africa. The IRF and the Global Alliance of Road Safety NGOs are conducting, and we are almost at the final stages of our review of responses and impacts on transport and mobility of both goods and people in 7 African countries. So make sure you register. I posted the link to get more information and to register. This is a free webinar, and don't forget to keep visiting the GTKP for the latest news on COVID under the COVID hub, but a lot more as well will be coming. There's a specific section on webinars as well in the GTKP website where you can always take a look at what's coming up. My turn now to thanks really both our speakers, Kevin, if you want to put on your camera, and Vishnu, and thanks all of you, the participants, literally from all over the world. Thank you so much. Namaste. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you, many of you, on Monday, I hope. Have a great day or a great evening. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you very much too.
Thank you.